In this episode of Children of Heroes, we spoke to Mr. Alan Hoida, the son of Sergeant Ervín Hoida, who we exceptionally interviewed online from his home in Malvern.
Thank you for participating in our project Children of Heroes. Your father, Ervín, served as a soldier during the Second World War. In fact, I had the pleasure of talking to him in one of our previous interviews, and he was just incredible. How was it like growing up next to a war hero?
It was fine. Obviously, coming from a Czech background with my father and a Scottish Lancastrian background from my mother, it made myself and my brother a little bit different from a lot of our other school friends. We had a strange name for a start, which no one could get right. And to this day, if anyone's filling in a form for me, I say my name and then I immediately spell it automatically so that people do get it right. So there was always that slight difference between us and our school friends. It wasn't a problem, but the minute you mentioned your name, there would become the question, oh, where's that name from? So then you would say, well, my name's from, my father's Czech. And you'd have to answer a few questions, which was fine. When we were very young, I mean, we knew he came from Czechoslovakia. We knew he came from a town called Ostrava, and he'd get letters in the post with Czech stamps on and things. So we knew exactly where we were from, where he was from. It was later on, when I was about 11 years old, I found all the photographs he had taken during that war period and became very interested and started asking the questions. So from the age of 11 onwards, I was, much more aware of my father's background and what he did during the war. And I've maintained that interest, obviously, since then. I have quite a decent collection of photographs and a lot of information, letters from his parents to him. The very first letters they wrote after the war when they were made contact again, and a lot of information. So it's a little archive I have.
Did he talk about his war experiences? And if yes, what was his favorite story?
Yes, I heard all the stories. And in fact, what I also had was, I can show it you, a marvelous book, which all the Czech soldiers, when they arrived in Cholmondeley Park, in the first part of the war for them, after they'd been evacuated from France and were retraining in Cholmondeley Park, we had this marvellous book which was written in French, English and Czech, and detailed all the battle plans, what happened, and brought it right up to date until that point in Cholmondeley Park when all the soldiers were retrained. So I was able to use that to ask questions of my father. What happened here? What happened there? And now a lot of that he has already told you in the previous interview. There's a little bit I can add to that, actually, which it gives a very nice link into the present. As my father said, in Gien, there was a battle in Gien when the Czech soldiers, very poorly equipped, they had a pocket full of probably 5 bullets and an ancient rifle. And they were situated on the bank of the river and they were instructed to stop the German forces advancing. And this was the elite German panzer divisions who were storming through France at the time. They were partially successful. I think they actually held, along with some French and some Canadian soldiers, did hold up the Germans from crossing the river for about 2 days. However, they were very short of rations. And my father was getting very hungry, and he scouted along the riverbank. And at the end of the bridge, which had been blown up, there was charcuterie, completely bombed out and ruined. And in that charcuterie, he found a tin of petit pois, which he was able to open with his bayonet. He said they're the best piece he ever had.
Přišel rozkaz jet zpátky, tak jsme šli do Žienu. A jak jsme jeli přes ten most v Žienu, tak přišli letadla, začali bombardovat ten most. Na konci mostu byl obchod a jedna bomba to rozhodla ten obchod a tak to bylo úplně otevřené. A jak jsem utíkal přesto, já jsem už 2 dny neměl co jíst, já jsem měl hlad, tak jsem viděl konzervu, jsem vzal jednu tu konzervu a utíkal jsem dále.
So we now fast forward, I knew the story, fast forward to 2002, and my wife and I were doing a little tour of France. So I knew the details of the battle and I knew the date. And we thought, well, if we're going that way, we'll drop by and look where this happened. And as we turned up to the bridge, I suddenly realised it was actually the anniversary of the Battle of Gien. And we just missed a celebration which had been held on the bridge with the way the French do. They celebrate with bands, with the anciens combattants, the old soldiers and school children and buntings. And we'd missed that. But on the way, when we'd realised the date, we'd stopped by and bought a little pot of flowers. And I'd written a little note with my address on, saying my father had fought here on this very day, the anniversary of this very day. We left it on the bridge. And that was that. But walking back across the bridge, we spotted the charcuterie rebuilt on the end of the bridge. So we went in, and there on the wall was a picture of the shop before the war, bombed out in the war and rebuilt. So I started a conversation with the owner, who was very nonplussed by this story of the petit pois. And I explained that we'd come in to pay for the tin of peas that my father had rescued from the shop during the war. And we looked up, and on the shelf they had jars of petit pois. So I took a jar of petit pois and said, I'll buy this now, which is in payment for the debt that my father owes you for the peas he stole during the war. They were a little nonplussed by this, but they gratefully accepted this. When we got back to England and I got home, there was already a letter on the doorstep. This was the letter that was arrived on the doorstep. And it was a letter from an ancien combattant, a veteran of the war, probably about the same age as my father. Wanted to know more details. He'd picked up my address on that we'd left on the bridge. And we kept up quite a long correspondence for a couple of years anyway. And he wanted more details because he was writing a book about the Battle of Gien, and he wanted to incorporate the Czech soldiers' side of the story. So that had a nice little rounded ending to the story, I thought.
After high school, you decided to study photography. What led you to it, and have you always known that you would like to work in arts?
Yes, I suppose my brother became an artist. I wasn't an artist. I played instruments. I was a bit of a musician. But I had an uncle on my mother's side who was very much into photography. And he actually gave me a camera at quite an early age. I was a teenager, and I got very interested in photography then. Took that on through school and developed that. And then in the end, I went to study photography in Birmingham, a branch of the Birmingham University, and qualified there. And that led me via various routes in the end into joining the BBC as a film editor. So it started at quite a young age, the interest in photography.
Yeah, and you received several awards. Can you tell us more?
Yes, at the BBC, I worked not completely, but largely with the Natural History Unit. So I worked on a lot of quite large, major series of films. In fact, I was looking the other day, I'd edited something in the region of 250 films during my career at the BBC. But the high point was I worked on the David Attenborough series, Life in the Freezer, and the first series of Blue Planet. And for both of those series, I was nominated for a BAFTA. We didn't win, but a nomination is pretty good. It's you've been voted in by your peers. And so, yes, that was quite a nice high point for me.
And did you like your job?
Oh, yes, I love my job. I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. In fact, I feel now that I'm now retired, but I feel now that I had the best years of the BBC. It was at a time when there were funds available. There were a large number of major projects going through the BBC. I started in film, which I absolutely loved. Film has a texture to it. You work with your hands with the film all the time. It has a nice smell, and I loved working with film. But obviously, computers started coming in, so I had to learn to use computers and ended up editing on computers. So I had this golden age of the BBC where we were making major series. There wasn't the financial constrictions that now apply to the BBC. The BBC had less competition, of course. And I did this transition from the wonderful feel of film to the marvelous ability of video to be able to electronically do things that would take a long time to do in film. So I was very pleased I was able to be in the BBC during that spell.
You play the guitar and played and sang in several local bands. How important a role has music played in your life?
It was my hobby. Since I was at school, I started playing. So I've played so many different genres of music through the various years. I think the very last years, in fact, I only finished, well, you know, I have cancer now, so I only finished a year ago when I started chemotherapy. I had to stop playing because of various side effects. And the last band I had, we played a great mixture of music, and it ranged from rock music to indie music to folk music to some traditional Irish music, with an eclectic lineup which featured mandolin and bass and guitar and fiddle and cajon. So that sort of nicely blended in all the different aspects of music I'd always done. So I'd say, yeah, that was probably my favorite period. But maybe I would add to that the period when I was much younger in the early 70s and playing in a rock band. And we locally were able to be a support band for all the major bands that came to play in Malvern. Malvern was a great hub for major concerts for all major bands pretty well. Played in Malvern at some point. So we got to play with them, which was a great thing.
We are approaching the end of our interview. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Just to say that my father, he is still alive, bright as a spark. If I was to play a game of cards with him now, he would beat me. So, yeah, I'm very pleased to see that he is still bright, although still a 104-year-old man and suffering from the obvious medical conditions that you would expect at that age.